The storm came out of nowhere, transforming the serene Caribbean waters into a vengeful maelstrom that tossed Julian Iverson's $65 million yacht like a child's bath toy. The wind howled through the rigging as waves crashed over the bow, and Julian, who had built an empire by anticipating market turns, found himself utterly blindsided by nature's fury. "Mr. Iverson, we need to drop anchor immediately," shouted his captain, gripping the wheel with white knuckles. "We're being pushed toward that island." Julian braced himself against the navigation console, his tailored linen shirt soaked through. "Do whatever you need to do," he yelled over the wind. At 38, he'd faced hostile takeovers and cutthroat competitors, but nothing had prepared him for the raw panic of watching his state-of-the-art vessel dragging helplessly toward the jagged shoreline of an uncharted island. The anchor chains rattled but found no purchase in the churning depths. Julian watched in horror as the massive hull scraped against submerged rocks with a sickening crunch. Water began to flood the lower cabins almost immediately. "Abandon ship. Get to the lifeboats." The captain ordered, and Julian's small crew of 5 scrambled to follow instructions. In the chaos that followed, Julian helped his crew into the single functioning lifeboat. The violent sea had damaged the second one beyond use. As the small craft pulled away, a massive wave slammed into the yacht, sending Julian flying overboard into the churning water. His crew screamed his name, but the current pulled him away from them, toward the looming shadow of the island. Julian fought against the waves, his lungs burning as salt water filled his nose and mouth. His world narrowed to a desperate battle for each breath until, miraculously, his feet touched sand. He crawled onto the beach, collapsing face down on the wet sand as consciousness slipped away. The sensation of something cool pressing against his forehead roused Julian. His eyes fluttered open to find a woman kneeling beside him, pressing a damp cloth to his brow. Her sun-bronzed skin contrasted with concerned teal eyes that studied him carefully. "You're alive," she said simply, her voice accented but clear. "I wasn't sure for a while there." Julian tried to speak but coughed up seawater instead. The woman helped him roll onto his side, supporting his shoulders as he purged his lungs. "Easy now, you've had a rough night." She offered him a coconut shell filled with fresh water. Small sips. When he could finally speak, Julian croaked, "My crew, if they were in that lifeboat, the Coast Guard picked them up at dawn. I radioed them about you, but the storms damaged the communications. They'll come back once it's safe to navigate these waters again." Julian took in his surroundings. They were in a small wooden structure, not quite a house, but sturdier than a shack elevated on stilts above the beach. Through the open doorway, he could see the remains of his yacht, listing badly against a reef about half a mile offshore. "Where am I?" Locally, we call it Tortuga Pequeña. You won't find it on most maps. "I'm Talia, by the way, Talia James, Julian Iverson." He waited for the recognition that usually followed his name, but Talia merely nodded and wrung out the cloth she'd been using. "Well, Julian Iverson, you're lucky to be alive. That reef has claimed bigger ships than yours." Julian tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "I need to call my office. People will be worried." Talia shook her head. "The storm knocked out our satellite connection. The radios are only linked to the mainland, and it's spotty at best. You'll have to be patient." "Patient," Julian felt panic rising. "You don't understand. I have a company to run, meetings scheduled, deals that none of which matter if you're dead," Talia interrupted calmly. "You have a concussion, probably some cracked ribs, and you nearly drowned. The world can manage without Julian Iverson for a few days." Her bluntness stunned him into silence. No one spoke to him that way. Not since he'd built Iverson Technologies into a Fortune 500 company, not since his net worth had crossed the billion-dollar mark 5 years ago. "I can pay you," Julian said finally, "for your help for better communications equipment. Name your price." Talia laughed, a warm sound that somehow irritated Julian further. "Money's not much use here, but if you're feeling grateful, you can help me bring in the fishing nets later. I'm short-handed this season." Julian stared at her incredulously. I don't fish. Then today's a good day to learn. She stood up, brushing sand from her worn shorts. Rest now, I'll check on you in a bit. As she left, Julian fell back against the simple cot, frustration coursing through him. He reached for his phone out of habit, then remembered it had been in his pocket when he went overboard. Even if it hadn't been ruined by salt water, there was apparently no signal here anyway. For the first time in 15 years, Julian Iverson was completely disconnected from his empire. The thought terrified him more than the storm had. The next morning, Julian woke to the sound of roosters crowing and waves lapping gently at the shore. His body ached, but his head felt clearer. He found a set of clothes folded at the foot of his cot, simple linen pants and a faded t-shirt that were definitely not his style but appeared clean. After changing, he ventured outside. The small island was more beautiful in daylight than he'd expected. Palm trees swayed in the gentle breeze, and the water beyond the reef sparkled in a dozen shades of blue. His yacht remained where he'd last seen it, a sad testament to the storm's power. He found Talia at the water's edge, securing a small fishing boat. She wore the same practical shorts as yesterday paired with a loose tank top, her dark hair twisted into a practical braid. Without makeup or pretense, she radiated a natural beauty that caught Julian off guard. "Morning, castaway," she called as he approached. "Feeling human again, more or less," Julian admitted. "Thank you for the clothes. They belonged to my brother. He left them when he moved to the mainland." She gestured toward the boat. "I was about to check the traps. Want to come?" Julian glanced at his yacht, then back to Talia. "I should check if anything's salvageable on board. The Coast Guard will handle that when they arrive. They've already assessed it from the air and confirmed it's not going to sink further. Nothing will happen to your fancy boat in the next hour." "It's not just a fancy boat," Julian said defensively. "The Mida's touch was a custom Beniti worth, let me guess," Talia interrupted, pushing the boat into the shallows. "More than this entire island, probably true. Coming or staying," Julian sighed, then waded into the water to help her. "I'm not much use on boats, as you've seen." Talia's laugh rang out again. "Fair point. But unless you're planning to fix my generator or catch your own dinner, you might want to expand your skill set while you're here." The morning passed more pleasantly than Julian had expected. Talia showed him how to check the lobster traps she had set in the shallows beyond the reef. She was patient but didn't coddle him, expecting him to pull his weight despite his obvious inexperience. By midday, they'd collected enough lobsters and fish to feed themselves, and what Talia called the village, apparently a small settlement of about 30 people on the other side of the island. "How did you end up here?" Julian asked as they rowed back to shore. "This doesn't seem like a place people accidentally find themselves." Talia's expression softened. "My father was a marine biologist studying the reef systems here. My mother fell in love with the island and started a small conservation program. I grew up between here and Florida until college." "And then you came back, after college," she nodded, her eyes on the horizon. "I studied marine conservation myself, worked for an NGO for a few years, then my parents died in a boating accident 4 years ago." She paused, her hands stilling on the oars momentarily. "Someone needed to continue their work." "I'm sorry about your parents," Julian said, surprised by the genuine emotion in his voice. "Thank you." She resumed rowing. "What about you? How does one become the kind of person who has a yacht called the Mida's Touch?" Julian laughed despite himself. "Work harder than everyone else, want it more than everyone else. And do you still want it? I mean," the question caught him off guard. "Of course. I built Iverson Technologies from nothing. We're revolutionizing clean energy storage solutions." "Noble," Talia acknowledged. "But that doesn't answer my question." Before Julian could respond, they reached the shore. As they unloaded their catch, he found himself watching Talia, her efficient movements, the way she spoke to the fish as she cleaned them, thanking them for their sacrifice. It was unlike anything in his world of boardrooms and balance sheets. That evening, Talia took Julian to the village. It was smaller than he'd imagined, a collection of colorful houses arranged around a central square with a small market area. Children played soccer while adults prepared a communal meal. Julian felt strangely self-conscious as they approached, aware of his designer watch and the way his posture screamed outsider. "Talia, you brought your castaway." An elderly woman approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm Alina, young man. Welcome to our island." Julian found himself enveloped in a warm hug before he could protest. "Thank you, I'm Julian." "The yacht man, yes, we know." Alina winked at him. "News travels fast here. Come, you must be hungry." The village welcomed him without fanfare or fuss, setting an extra place at the long communal table as if unexpected guests washed ashore every day. The meal was simple but delicious: grilled fish, plantains, rice, and the lobsters they'd caught that morning. Children peppered him with questions about the mainland, and elders shared stories of past storms that had brought unexpected visitors to their shores. Julian found himself relaxing for the first time in years. No one here cared about his net worth or his company's stock price. No one was angling for a promotion or trying to leverage a connection. They simply accepted his presence as part of life's unpredictable current. As night fell, someone brought out guitars and music filled the square. Couples began to dance, and Julian watched as Talia was pulled to her feet by an older man who twirled her expertly. She moved with natural grace, her laughter carrying over the music. When the song ended, she made her way back to where Julian sat, not much of a dancer. She asked, slightly breathless. "Not much of anything today," Julian admitted. "Yacht captain, fisherman, dancer, I'm striking out across the board." Talia's expression softened. "You're being too hard on yourself. Yesterday you nearly died, today you caught your own dinner, that's progress. At this rate, I might become a functioning human being by next month. Maybe that wouldn't be so terrible." She held out her hand. "Come on, billionaire, dance with me." Julian hesitated, then took her hand. "I should warn you, my dancing is strictly limited to formal events with carefully rehearsed steps." "Then forget those steps," Talia said, leading him to the center of the square. "Listen to the music instead." Under the stars, with the sound of waves in the background and surrounded by strangers who asked nothing of him, Julian danced. Badly at first, then with growing confidence as Talia guided him, her hands warm in his, her smile encouraging rather than judging. Something tight in his chest began to loosen. Later, as they walked back to Talia's home along the moonlit beach, Julian found himself telling her about his life, not the sanitized version he gave to business magazines, but the truth. How he'd grown up with a father who measured love and achievements. How he'd built his company partly to prove something. How his engagement had ended 2 years ago when his fiancée had finally given him an ultimatum about his workaholic tendencies. "She said I was married to my company," Julian admitted, kicking at the sand. "She wasn't wrong." "And do you regret it, choosing the company?" Julian looked out at the dark silhouette of his yacht. "I didn't think so, until recently." "Recently being when your yacht hit a reef and you nearly drowned." Talia's voice held a teasing note, but her eyes were serious. "Maybe. Or maybe when I realized that if I had died out there, my company would have issued a press release, appointed my CFO as interim CEO, and continued without missing a beat." They reached Talia's house, and she lit a lantern, the warm glow illuminating the simple space. "That's the curse of building something that can outlast you," she said quietly. "But it's also the blessing. You've created something with its own life." Julian studied her in the lantern light. "What about you? Do you ever regret coming back here, taking on your parents' work?" Talia was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been. I had job offers in Washington, a boyfriend who wanted me to move to California with him. What happened? I chose this." She gestured to the island around them. "It's not always easy, but it's never empty." She met his gaze directly. "Can you say the same about your life, Julian?" He couldn't answer. They said goodnight with that question hanging between them. 3 days passed, and Julian found himself falling into the rhythm of island life. Each morning, he helped Talia with her conservation work, checking water quality, documenting the health of the coral reef, tagging sea turtles. In the afternoons, he joined the village men in repairing storm damage or helped Talia with her endless projects. The satellite connection remained down, but strangely, Julian found himself less anxious about it with each passing day. On the fourth day, they took Talia's small boat to the Midas Touch to salvage what they could. The Coast Guard had secured the vessel but reported that extensive repairs would be needed before it could be moved. Inside the yacht, Julian collected his laptop, some clothes, and important documents, all thankfully stored in waterproof cases. As they explored the damaged interior, Talia whistled softly. "This is what $1 billion looks like, huh?" Julian looked around at the custom leather furnishings, the marble countertops, the gold-plated fixtures all now listing at an awkward angle, some damaged by salt water. No. This is just stuff. Expensive stuff, Talia countered, running her fingers over the yacht's control panel. Yes, but... Julian hesitated, struggling to articulate the shift in his perspective. Standing here now, it all seems less impressive than I remembered. Talia studied him with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see more than he intended to show. The things we own end up owning us sometimes. That sounds like something from a self-help book, Julian teased. Or something from someone who's watched too many people chase things that don't make them happy. She picked up a framed photo from the floor, Julian shaking hands with a former president. "Is this what happiness looks like to you?" Julian took the photo, studying his own face in the image, smiling for the camera but not with his eyes. It was at the time. That night, the satellite connection was finally restored. Julian sat on Talia's porch with his laptop, reconnecting with his world. Hundreds of emails flooded in, along with dozens of missed calls and text messages. His executive team had been frantic until the Coast Guard confirmed he was alive. His sister had threatened to hire private search and rescue. His absence had made the financial news, with analysts speculating on what his potential death might mean for Iverson Technologies' stock price. It was all exactly what he should have expected, yet it felt oddly distant, as if he were reading about someone else's life. Talia joined him, setting a mug of tea beside his computer. "Everything still standing in your empire," Julian nodded. "Apparently I'm irreplaceable after all. The stock dropped 8% when news broke about the yacht. Is that a lot? About $400 million in market value." Talia whistled. "And here I was feeling accomplished because we tagged 12 sea turtles this week." Julian closed his laptop. "Your sea turtles will outlast my stock price fluctuations." She smiled, leaning against the porch railing. "When will they come for you?" "Now that communications are back. I've arranged for a seaplane to land the day after tomorrow. They'll take me to Puerto Rico where my corporate jet is waiting." The words felt hollow as he said them. "Back to real life," Talia said softly. "Is this not real?" Julian gestured to the island around them. "Not for you. This is just an intermission in Julian Iverson's regularly scheduled programming." The hurt in her voice surprised him. "Talia." She shook her head. "Don't mind me. I've always known the castaways eventually leave." She stood up. "I'm turning in. Lots to do tomorrow before you go." Julian watched her disappear inside, feeling an unexpected ache in his chest. In less than a week, this woman had somehow slipped past defenses he'd spent years constructing. She challenged him, frustrated him, and made him laugh more genuinely than he had in years. The next day passed in a blur of preparations. Julian sent emails to his team, rescheduled meetings, and tried to shift his mind back into CEO mode. But his attention kept drifting to Talia, who maintained a cheerful but decidedly more distant manner than previous days. In the afternoon, she announced she needed to check on a remote section of the reef. "Want to come? One last adventure before you return to civilization." They snorkeled in a sheltered cove where the reef had escaped the worst of the storm damage. Beneath the surface, Julian followed Talia through an underwater paradise of coral formations and darting fish. She moved through the water with the confidence of someone completely in her element, occasionally pointing out particular species or formations for him to notice. In one magical moment, a sea turtle glided past, close enough that Julian could have touched it. The creature regarded him with ancient eyes before continuing on its unhurried journey. When they surfaced, Julian found himself speechless. "That's Xavier," Talia said, treading water beside him. "He's about 60 years old. I've been tracking him since I was a child." "It's incredible," Julian said finally. "All of this, it's like another world." "It is another world, one worth protecting." Talia's expression grew serious. "That's what my parents understood, what I understand. Some things are worth dedicating your life to." Back on the beach, they sat watching the sunset. Julian's departure loomed between them, unspoken but ever present. "What will you tell people?" Talia asked finally. "About your time here," Julian considered the question. "The truth. That I nearly died, was saved by an extraordinary woman, and learned more in a week than in years of board meetings." Talia smiled sadly. "They'll nod politely and then ask when your next quarterly report is coming out." "Probably," Julian admitted. He turned to face her fully. "Come with me." The words surprised them both. "What?" Talia blinked at him. "Come with me, to Puerto Rico, to New York, anywhere, just don't let tomorrow be goodbye." Talia stared at him. "Julian, we barely know each other. I know enough. I know you're brilliant and fearless and that you see the world differently than anyone I've ever met. I know that for the first time in years, I've felt truly alive this week." "That's the near-death experience talking," Talia said, but her voice lacked conviction. "No," Julian said firmly. "It's more than that. You asked me if I regretted choosing my company over everything else. The answer is yes. I've built something impressive but hollow. You've shown me a different way to live." "I can't leave the island," Talia said quietly. "My parents' work, I'm not asking you to abandon it. I'm asking for a chance to see if what's happening between us is real." Julian took her hand. "I have resources, Talia. We could expand your conservation efforts, build a proper research station here." Talia withdrew her hand. "So you want to buy your way into my life, make me another acquisition?" "No, that's not what I meant." Julian ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'm saying I want to be part of what matters to you. I want to help. By throwing money at it, by being there, physically, with you." Julian took a deep breath. "What if I stayed, not forever, not right away? But what if I came back, regularly? What if I worked remotely for a while?" Talia studied his face. "You do that. The great Julian Iverson would work from a tiny island with spotty internet." "I would." The certainty in his voice surprised even him. "For the chance to see where this could go, yes." The tension in Talia's expression eased slightly. "You'd get bored, or frustrated. The Julian I've glimpsed these past days might enjoy this life, but the CEO would suffocate here. Then maybe it's time for the CEO to step back a little." Julian moved closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I built a company, Talia. I can rebuild a life." This time when he kissed her, she didn't pull away. The seaplane that arrived the next morning carried not just a pilot, but Julian's executive assistant, Kate, and his head of security, both of whom had insisted on coming once they learned he was alive. "Mr. Iverson?" Kate rushed forward as Julian approached the beach, tablet in hand. "Thank goodness you're all right. We have the quarterly review scheduled for Monday. The Tokyo deal needs your signature and the board is expecting—" "Kate," Julian interrupted gently. "Breathe. Everything's fine." Kate blinked at him, then at Talia, who stood slightly behind him. "Sir, your schedule is going to need some adjustments," Julian smiled. "I'd like you to meet Talia James. She saved my life and she's going to be a significant part of it moving forward." Confusion crossed Kate's face, but she recovered quickly. "Miss James, thank you for taking care of Mr. Iverson. We're all extremely grateful." Talia shook Kate's hand. "He's not as high maintenance as I expected a billionaire to be." Julian laughed, then turned serious. "Kate, I need you to clear my schedule for the next 2 weeks. And when we get to Puerto Rico, set up a video conference with the executive team. I'll be implementing some changes." Kate's eyes widened. 2 weeks? But sir, the Beijing presentation will be handled brilliantly by Anjali, I'm sure. Julian placed a hand on Kate's shoulder. I nearly died last week, Kate. It's given me some perspective. The village gathered to see them off, many bringing small gifts for Julian: hand-woven bracelets, a carved wooden turtle, jars of local honey. Alina hugged him fiercely. You come back to us, yacht man. Talia smiles more with you here. As the seaplane prepared for takeoff, Julian took Talia's hands in his. 2 weeks. I'll be back in 2 weeks with engineers to assess what you need for a proper research station, and then we'll figure out the rest together. Talia's eyes shimmered with tears, but she was smiling. I still think you're crazy. Probably, Julian agreed. But for the first time in a long time, I feel sane. He kissed her, not caring that Kate and the entire village were watching. Thank you for saving more than just my life. As the seaplane lifted off, Julian watched the island growing smaller beneath them. His yacht was still visible, stranded on the reef, a monument to his old life. But unlike the Midas touch, Julian himself wasn't stranded anymore. He was simply changing course. 6 months later, the Julian Iverson Marine Conservation Center opened on Tortuga Pequeña. The state-of-the-art facility featured solar power, satellite communications, and research equipment that drew marine biologists from around the world. Julian split his time between the island and his corporate offices, having promoted his COO to handle day-to-day operations. On the night of the center's opening, Julian and Talia stood on the new observation deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Still think I was crazy? Julian asked, his arm around her waist. Talia leaned into him. Completely, but it turns out I like crazy. She turned to face him. Are you happy, truly? Julian considered the question, thinking of the changes in his life. His company continued to thrive under its new leadership structure. He worked fewer hours but found his contributions more meaningful. And most importantly, he had found something he'd never realized was missing: a partner who challenged him, supported him, and loved him not for what he had built but for who he was beneath the billionaire facade. I'm happier than I ever thought possible, he said honestly. It took losing everything to find what I really needed. Which was, Julian smiled, pulling her closer. A bossy marine conservationist who wasn't impressed by my yacht, Talia laughed. The yacht that's now part of an artificial reef system teeming with marine life. I'd say that worked out rather well. Everything worked out rather well, Julian agreed, reaching into his pocket for the small box he'd been carrying all day. Though there's one more thing that would make it perfect. As he dropped to one knee on the deck of the conservation center built with both their dreams, Julian knew that the storm that had nearly claimed his life had instead given him something far more precious: a second chance, a new purpose, and a love that had healed his heart in ways he hadn't known it needed healing. And when Talia whispered yes against his lips, Julian Iverson, billionaire and castaway, knew he'd finally found his way home.